So I've always been a firm believer in Escape from Tarkov, you can use whatever damn gun you feel like. Part of the fun for me is always trying different things with different builds. However, patch after patch, there always seems to be a clear-cut meta within the community, especially among the players that take the game extremely seriously. Whether it was the Chris Vector, the AS Val, the HK, but after the nerfs, the CMMG Mutant, is it any good? And how does it compare against the AK platform in general? Let's take a look at some of the best builds, and I'll show you some of my thoughts about how this gun actually fits within the meta. Now, as for ammo, you've got a couple choices. The first one's going to be PS, which is going to be nice and cheap. Now, PS is going to get the job done. However, if you're running a Mutant and running up against a lot of geared boys, you may regret it. Especially when spending so much on a gun, you might not want to cheap out on the ammo. We've done some armor testing on PS. It can get the job done, especially with the fact that it can go through level 3 armors, most helmets with ease, and a lot of the time it is 100% pen chance on most visors, except for things like the Alton. I did want to point out that at level 3 workbench, you can craft BP. Now, BP is an insane round. In fact, it is probably one of the strongest rounds in the game, period, and it's probably why the Mutant is so favored within the community. You can craft 200 BP for around about 150,000 rubles if you buy all the gunpowder yourself. This is not if you find it, however. So if you buy all the gunpowder, let's say you pay full price, you can actually find that with the 200 rounds, not including the price of fuel, you're paying around 750 rubles per bullet, so you can either sell it and make a little bit of money on the fleet or just simply run it. I did want to point out that BP is nuts, so I would consider running BP minimum. Unfortunately, at this stage of the game with the gear getting around, BP is almost a necessary evil. However, you don't have to, as PS will still get the job done. Now, if you're an absolute late game baller and you simply just want to flex on everyone, you can run MAI AP. Though I did want to point out that with some of the gear in the community, especially if you are running maps like Labs, a round like MAI AP is completely nuts. It has 58 pen and can pretty much go through every helmet. You're not going to have to worry about Altons, and if someone's wearing something like a Hex Grid or a Slick, you're going to completely eat them for breakfast. However, you do sacrifice a bit of flesh damage. I wanted to point out that MAI AP has 46 flesh compared to BP's 58. The main problem, however, is BP only has 47 pen. So if you do run the Mutant and you run up against someone with a Slick, it may take a couple of extra shots to bring them down. I've personally had a couple experiences where I've shot extremely geared players with BP and then had them run away to my surprise. But anything under level 6, they don't stand a chance. So I've made other videos in the past comparing the AK platform in general, but let's just take a quick look at the AKM versus the AKMN, two of the best performing in the platform so far. And what's really interesting is there's no real big difference between them, except the AKMN has one additional ergo. If we continue to compare them towards the 7.62 variants, we're going to straight up notice the AK-103 comes in at a really good price, as well as the fact that it outperforms the AKMN in not only just ergo, but also recoil across the board. If you guys aren't sold, we decided to build both of these in the meta configuration. It doesn't change much over the years. In fact, starting off with the JMAC compensator, as we work towards the gas block, we're going to change it over to the Troy, then the RK2, the Bastion dust cover, and then we're going to be changing up the pistol grip here to one of the new ones, which is the AGS-74 custom arms pistol grip. Then we're going to go ahead and throw on the ME adapter, and then once we've done this, we're actually going to use the MESA tactical crosshair hydraulic buffer tube. On the end of this bad boy, we're going to go ahead and use the PRS Gen 3, which actually has a really good recoil reduction. So this whole build is going to cost you about 170,000 rubles in parts, not including the AK itself, which is actually pretty considerable. And if we compare it side by side against a similarly built AK-103, in fact, it pretty much takes all of the same meta parts. But we're switching up towards the PT3 foldable stock, as the AK-103 does have a foldable stock. Now this build actually here for the 103 is also cheaper. It's actually going to come in at 134,000 rubles in parts. Not to mention the gun itself is around about the same price anyway. Now, if we compare the two side by side, the first thing you're going to notice is that the AK-103 has 69 ergo.
Nice.
But not just that. In fact, if we look at the vertical recoil, we're going to notice that the 103 actually only has one additional vertical recoil, but it does lose out by 9 in the horizontal compared to the AKMN. But what about the Mutant? You can purchase the Mutant from Skier Level Max for a cool 104,000 rubles. Now, if we look at the gun statistically stock up against an AK-103, we'll immediately notice that the two of them are actually quite competitive. In fact, the Mutant has higher ergo than the 103, but the 103 actually has better recoil. Not just that, but it also has better muzzle velocity, and it actually wins out in terms of effective distance because of this. The CMMG Mutant has an additional 50 rounds per minute. When it comes down to builds, it's pretty much the same. We're going to be changing the buffer tube to the advanced buffer, and then immediately we're going to be using the PRS Gen 3 as it has a really good balance here on ergo. But if you want to go for a better combo, I would recommend the Mo buffer, as the Mo buffer with the butt pad is absolutely killer this patch and has a good balance between higher ergo and a decent amount of recoil. But for the short build, we will be using the PRS Gen 3. Now, you can keep the default pistol grip as it's really good anyway, but we're going to be switching up to the Graal S for that 5 additional ergo. We're not going to be able to do too much to the gun, but for this short build, we're going to be keeping the barrel at the 254mm variant. You can extend it, but for this build, I would recommend keeping it default. You save money and it's just as good. Now, we're going to be using the Lantac A3 blast mitigation adapter, the Lantac Dragon compensator, and also the blast mitigation device. Slapping on the 4.1-inch M-LOK guide, we can actually go ahead and choose from a wide variety of different grips. I'm going to recommend the Zenit RK1 as it's one of the best in the game right now. You can also use a nice scope that sits nice and high, but be aware that the muzzle flash is absolutely insane. So if you do want to use this loud build, although the ergo and the price for this build is really good, you do need to be aware that the muzzle flash can be quite nuts. So if you are using this build, I would recommend using a LaRue Picatinny riser. This whole build's going to set you back about 109,000 rubles, not including the gun. That's around about 200,000 rubles for this gun all up, not including ammo. And this isn't even the best in slot build. If we do want to do the best in slot build, we're going to go ahead and change the buffer tube once again to the advanced buffer tube. This thing is one of the best in the game right now. Then we're going to change it up to the PRS Gen 3, and then moving over towards the pistol grip, we're going to be changing this to the Graal S. It's pretty much all across the same, except this time we're going to be switching up to the 409mm barrel. The long barrel actually gives us better recoil reduction, but sacrifices ergo. To change the handguard, we're going to be going for one of my favorites, the AR-10 Novesk SWS N6 split. Not only does it allow us to put an iron sight at the front for the additional 1 ergo, but it allows us to actually mount one of my favorite grips in the game. And this grip is the Hera Arms CQR Tactical Grip. This is a great grip for value and also ergo and recoil balance. We are going to go towards the suppressor. And a lot of people who are stuck in the past, especially after some of the recent changes, are going to tell you use the T-lock and then the suppressor and so on and so forth with the compensator. But this combination actually received a couple nerfs recently. So if we want the best of the best, we are actually going to be using the Thunder Beast compensator here today, the 308. And then we're going to be slapping the suppressor over the top of that. And this actually gives us a decent combination of 40 ergo, 53 vertical recoil, which is virtually nothing, and 123 horizontal. This entire build is quite expensive, around 185,000 rubles, as the suppressor is quite expensive. But if you are running a suppressed Mutant build, I would recommend switching out the stock from the PRS Gen 3 to something with a little bit more ergo like the Mo buffer with the butt pad on the end of it. This just feels better and also helps with the ADS time, as once you load a full magazine into this, it can be quite sluggish and bad on the arms. So after we finish looking at all the builds and looking at that recoil, why would you choose the Mutant over the AK or vice versa? Let's talk about the major difference here, and that is mastery. Now, mastery actually affects how much of the camera recoil that shakes. So an example would be if you had higher mastery, the camera would shake less when firing the gun. Now, this is significant because the AK platform in general shares a wide variety of different guns in mastery. Whereas the Mutant, when you level the Mutant alone. If you do use the newer AKs, it will level up all of the other AKs at the same time. Whether that is the AK-100 series or something like the AK-74M, any sort of AK like this will continue to level up. So if you use the 103, it will level up your AK-101 and your 102 and your 105, even though they are all different calibers. The older AKs also share mastery. Stuff like the Vepa 136, the AKM, and the AKMSN all share the mastery. Now next up is recoil and ergo, and I did want to point out that the Mutant is obviously a lower recoil gun. But when you do get that recoil down significantly lower, you do lose out a lot in ergonomics, especially with the meta build for the Mutant being around 40 ergo compared to the meta AK-103 at 69. And the recoil isn't that much significantly different either. We have 53 vertical on the meta Mutant compared to 57 on the AK. We're sitting at 123 horizontal on the Mutant and compared to the 139 of the AK-103. I did want to point out though, there is about a 50 to 60,000 ruble difference between these two in build price. So if that's something you're considering, then that's obviously a reason to choose the AK once again. And I did want to point out that the Mutant does have a faster time to kill at 50 rounds per minute faster than the AK platform. Now, this isn't a huge deal in the terms of things, because if you think about the actual time to kill, MAI AP can about 3 hit most armors in the game. BP will 3 to 4 hit pretty much every armor in the game. So an additional 50 rounds per minute is only going to give you about 0.2 of a millisecond extra time to kill if you're hitting all of your shots. So is this really something that you would argue that you would spend the extra money on? And last but not least, guys, and this isn't a real point, it really just comes down to personal preference. I'm not going to tell you which gun to run. I personally am going to continue to run the AK, especially the 103, as it doesn't really need much to shine. In fact, I don't even put any sort of money into it anyways. I just put a compensator, a butt pad, and a Cobra sight, and I'm good to go. But this is just my own personal preference. I find the AK platform far more sexy than the Mutant. I think the Mutant is kind of ugly, but the gun is actually insane, guys. There's no denying that the Mutant is one of the kings in the meta right now. There's a reason you see it in pretty much all of your raids, especially among the super geared dudes. And honestly, all the power to them if they do enjoy this gun. But for me personally, guys, the takeaway of this entire video is that I still think the AK platform is stronger. Hey guys, that's it for this video. Hopefully this video helped you make up your mind about which one you want to run, or just trying to understand some of the differences between them. I hope you had a good time in the video today. If you did, consider subscribing to the content. If there's a particular gun you'd like to see me do next, let me know in the comment section down below. I really appreciate all the love recently. If you guys want to come out and watch me run these guns live, as always, I do stream on Twitch. The link for that will also be featured down below if you want to come and hang out and talk shit. And as always, we'll see you on the next one.